I watched Dead of Winter recently, and it is really, really good. Unlike some other movies I've seen recently, I was sucked in completely from start to finish. I cared about the characters, the plot. All in all, I was on the edge of my seat, and I have things to say. Specifically about how the desperation to live forces one into depravity. So, obviously, spoilers ahead. It's only around like an hour and a half, and it's a great thriller movie for the upcoming winter. If you really don't want to watch it for whatever reason, or if you have but just need a refresher, I'll recap the movie for you guys. So, after her husband's death, Bob, our main lead, heads out to fulfill his last request, that being to have his ashes scattered in Lake Hilda, Minnesota. A huge snowstorm is happening though, forcing her to a nearby cabin and asking for directions. When Bob reaches the lake, she sees a girl, Leah, bound and escaping but caught by the man we saw earlier, who isn't named, we'll just call him Camo. Bob goes back to the cabin and finds a young woman tied up in the basement, the wife of the man, who also isn't named, which, yeah, we'll call her Purple, finds Bob's mitten outside of the house. Since they can't be caught as kidnappers, they go after Bob onto the ice where Camo falls into the lake and where Bob heads back. She can't get Leah out of the cabin basement, so she floods most of the cabin. The couple returns and Purple shoots Bob before she's able to escape, but she is able to get back to the cabin and goes to a radio to ask for help until Purple interrupts. This is where we learn why Purple picked Leah. She went into the hospital after a suicide attempt and Purple is terminally sick. She kidnapped Leah for a chance to harvest her organs and save herself. Bob escapes and manages to convince Camo to drive to the nearest town and get help from the cops and healthcare as well. On the way, he's intercepted by Purple. Now, back to Bob. She blows up a truck in an attempt for help. Two people stop on the road and they all drive back to the cabin to try to help Leah. But Purple shoots both of the hunters and they both die. It's also heavily implied that she killed her husband as well. Bob and Camo both fight each other for their lives, but ultimately it's Bob who ends up in the basement. She manages to free herself, but Purple catches them before Leah can get free. And eventually, Purple forces Bob and Leah to accompany her back to the lake at gunpoint. They get to a makeshift tent in the middle of the lake, where Purple forces Bob to duct tape Leah to a surgical bed, and then hurriedly prepares Leah for the surgery. Purple and Bob fight, starting a fire, trapping Leah. Luckily, she managed to free herself, and they escape the burning tent back to the ice. In a final, beautiful act of sacrifice, Bob handcuffs Purple to her and drags them both into the icy water. And in the most visually stunning scene of this film, both of the wounded women sink to their deaths. Bob releases a metal box of her husband's ashes, finally accomplishing what she set out to do at the beginning of the film. Alright, we got that out of the way. Let's get into the actual part of the video. One of the main themes of this movie is desperation. What one does when their life is on the line. Purple kidnaps Leah because she's sick and because Leah was suicidal. In her mind, tainted with that fear of death, she rationalizes. It's okay, she wanted to die anyways, despite heavy evidence to the contrary. And it's this frenzy to keep herself alive that drives the story forward. And in some way, you could relate it to the transplant problem. If you're unaware, which how? It's fucking everywhere. The essential question is this. Would you kill and take the organs of one perfectly healthy man to save 5 others? This question has been and always will be debated, and it will be changed and formed in slightly different variations, and this movie does just that. Would you take the organs of a healthy, yet suicidal girl to save your own life? Purple. Well, she says yes. It's a desperation to survive, to bring herself to this state of immorality. Not only bringing this innocent girl to her death, but roping her, well, mostly indifferent husband to it as well. You can tell he doesn't really agree with his wife based on how unconcerned he is with his role. But despite his incompetency, Purple forces Camo into a scheme because she has no other choice. When someone's backed into a corner, of course they're gonna fight as hard as they can to stay alive. While we can't say that she's entirely justified in doing what she does, we at least know why she does it. Purple has two main opponents here. The first one being Bob, obviously. She's trying to save Leah, so of course Purple has to fight. But his second opponent is much bigger and much harder to defeat with a gun or violence. That opponent is time. Why not just get someone else if she escapes? Why would you go to such great lengths to keep this one goal? Someone who isn't bound by time isn't going to be so panicked, but someone who is worried by time will be. If you pay attention, you'll notice that the entire movie takes place over the course of 2 days maximum. And, as Camo says here,
we're not about 2 hours.
Since there's no other life for hours, and since Purple is trapped by the endless ticking of time, she has to use Leah. But as the film progresses, more and more people stand in her way. The first are our lovely hunter friends, armed yet unable to stop Purple. 2 more innocents are added to the death count to save 1 life. These hunters represent hope. They show up to help Bob in a time of need and to help her save Leah. With Purple killing these 2, it represents the death of hope. Bob knows that she has to save Leah and that she has to do it by herself. Unfortunately, we're not done with this scene just yet. Just minutes later, we see a horrifying shot of Camo's corpse. At this point, Purple has sacrificed her husband for her own survival. If he had made it to Alaska, Purple would have been arrested and died in jail from her condition. Therefore, in her mind at least, it's better for her to kill her husband if it means that she gets a shot at surviving. It's ironic, really, that he's the one who dies first, given how he's not the one with a life-threatening condition. Not only that, but if you recall this line, you see Purple's hypocrisy. She leaves him when he needs her most to care for him. One more tally mark onto the list of innocent deaths for the survival of one woman. While Purple best embodies the motif of desperation, Bob does so excellently as well. When Bob is captured and chained to the basement, she throws shoes at the shelf to get the box of her husband's ashes. While her quest to fulfill her husband's request takes a backseat into saving Leah, it's still in the background, and as Leah herself notices.
That left box!
In the final scenes, all 3 women are desperate. Purple to save herself, Leah to save herself, and Bob to save Leah. The fire is born out of Bob's and Purple's fightings, and it traps Leah inside. The fire represents the chaos that comes out of pure selfishness. In the end, someone will have to be sacrificed for the sake of another, but who that is, isn't who we think. Bob, old and having lived her life, sacrifices herself. Chaining herself to Purple, she falls into the frozen lake, saving Leah. In some sick, twisted way, everyone got what they wished for. Bob was able to scatter her husband's ashes into the lake. Leah got to escape, and Purple didn't die of her disease. Desperation is at the core of this film. It's what drives this story forward. If Purple wasn't so desperate to live, then this movie wouldn't have happened, but it's also what ends it too. If Bob wasn't so desperate to save Leah, and if Leah wasn't so desperate to survive, then she wouldn't have lived at all. This movie shows what happens when your life is on the line, and what one is capable of when it is, but at the center, sacrifice is there as well. Purple is clearly old, and Bob is older. Leah contrasts against them, being the youngest of them all. Purple is willing to sacrifice the life of a much younger woman for the chance for her to live a little longer. When compared to how long Leah could live, it really isn't worth it. And Bob, oldest of them all, having lived a long and fulfilling life, at least according to the flashbacks, sacrifices herself for Leah. All 3 are desperate, but it's how they act upon the desperation that separates the moral from the immoral, the good from the bad, the living from the dead. Originally, when I was taking notes for this movie, I was thinking that I could write about how the tension is built throughout the film, like with the music rising, motifs in them, how winter symbolizes death. But when I was writing the script, I thought that writing about desperation would have been more fun to watch. If you guys want to see the tension video, let me know, I'll make it. But for now, that's all. If there's any movies you want me to analyze, let me know in the comments. This has been Cons. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.